So what happens when a government basically goes to war with itself? Not over a policy, but over the actual rule book that runs the country. Well, in the Philippines, that's pretty much what's going on. The Supreme Court and Congress are in this massive constitutional standoff, and right in the middle of it all is an attempt to impeach the vice president. Okay, let's get right into it, because this whole mess boils down to one single critical question. When you're trying to impeach a top official, who actually gets to decide the rules of the game? Is it Congress, the people who write the laws, or is it the Supreme Court, the final authority on what those laws mean? So, you've got two major players in this drama. On one side, there's the Philippine Congress, which feels it has the sole power to handle impeachments, and on the other side, you have the Supreme Court, who's stepping in to say, not so fast. There are constitutional limits to that power, and their battleground, the impeachment of Vice President Sara Duterte. And then, the bombshell dropped. The Supreme Court issued a final ruling. Those impeachment articles filed against the vice president back in 2025, they said they were unconstitutional. Just like that, the court didn't just halt a political process, it put itself on a direct collision course with the entire legislative branch. Okay, to really understand this fight, we first have to unpack the Supreme Court side of the story. Why did they make such a huge move? Well, it all comes down to a very specific, and now very controversial, constitutional rule. Everything hinges on this thing called the one-year bar rule. The easiest way to think about it is like a constitutional cool-down period. It basically says you can't just keep filing impeachment after impeachment against the same person within a one-year window. It's supposed to stop the process from being used as a political weapon. So, how did this rule come into play here? Well, there were several impeachment complaints filed against the vice president. The court essentially said, hey, the first complaint started a one-year clock. That means any other complaints filed inside that one-year period, like the fourth one, were automatically off limits. They were, in the court's eyes, unconstitutional. But this is where it gets really controversial. See, the court didn't just apply the rule, it completely redefined when an impeachment officially starts. They came up with these three new triggers. Now an impeachment is initiated the second it's referred to a committee, or even if Congress just doesn't act on it fast enough. The court essentially rewrote the rule book for Congress, and that is what caused the explosion. As you can imagine, Congress's reaction was immediate and pretty furious. They didn't see this as some helpful legal clarification. Nope. They saw it as the Supreme Court grabbing power that simply doesn't belong to it. Their words for it, judicial overreach. Their whole argument goes back to the absolute basics of government, right? The judiciary's job is to interpret the law, the legislature's job is to create the law, and, crucially, the legislature gets to write its own internal rules. From where Congress is sitting, the Supreme Court just jumped its lane and started writing Congress's procedural manual for them. And this quote from a lawmaker just hits the nail on the head. It perfectly captures that feeling in Congress. They feel the court didn't just read the Constitution, it added new pages, creating a precedent they believe is incredibly dangerous for the country's balance of power. So if you boil it all down, Congress's main complaints are pretty clear. The court made up its own definition of a session day, it created new deadlines that are nowhere in the Constitution, and lawmakers see all of this as a direct intrusion into their power as a co-equal branch of government. So with these two powerful branches of government in a direct standoff, the entire country was kind of teetering on the edge of a full-blown crisis. The big question became, how do you step back from the brink? And let's be really clear about the stakes here. If Congress had just said, you know what, we're ignoring the Supreme Court and went ahead with the impeachment anyway, that would have kicked off a constitutional crisis. I mean, total chaos with two branches of government claiming they have the final say. This quote from a congressman is so telling because it shows you the mindset that won out in the end. Leaders in Congress realized that even if they thought they were right, pushing the issue would just lead to a chaotic nation. The stability of the country had to come first. So what was the off-ramp? Well, instead of escalating the fight, Congress decided to de-escalate. They announced a plan to actually amend their own impeachment rules to bring them in line with the Supreme Court's new decision. You could call it a strategic retreat, really, choosing to accept the ruling to keep the country stable. So the constitutional crisis might be averted, for now, but the political battle, oh, that is far from over, because the Supreme Court's ruling had very specific limits, and now a new clock is ticking. This is a really important detail to remember. The court was very, very clear about what it didn't do. This ruling was all about procedure, the how and when of an impeachment. It had absolutely nothing to say about whether the actual accusations against the vice president were true or not. That story is still wide open. So, where does that leave us? This timeline lays it all out pretty clearly. The clock for that one-year ban started ticking way back when those first complaints were filed in 2025. And that clock officially runs out on a very specific date, February 6th, 2026. And trust me, everyone involved has that date circled on their calendar. The vice president's opponents have already made it clear they plan to file new impeachment complaints the moment that one-year ban is lifted. The whole political fight is set to start all over again, only this time under a brand new set of rules written by the Supreme Court. And all of this leaves us with the million-dollar question, doesn't it? By backing down and changing its rules, did Congress actually fix the problem and avoid a crisis for good? Or did this whole episode just kick the can down the road, postponing an even bigger political and constitutional fight for another day?